Hey folks, this video is sponsored by Trade Coffee, so join me in a little bit and I'll tell you a bit more about that.
I think it looks slightly less like an apology video if I sit slightly to the side. Does that work? Hey folks, Barnaby Dixon here. So some of you know I was recently involved in the Dark Crystal Age of Resistance, which is now available on Netflix and produced by the Jim Henson Company. So I thought I'd give you a little bit of a rundown of my involvement in the project. So back in August of 2017, I get a phone call from the director, Louis Leterrier, who says that he has me in mind for a specific scene. I later found out that he learnt of my stuff by Googling something like crazy puppetry or insane puppeteers, something like that. So that's how he found out about me. He drew a really useful reference point to a scene in the Harry Potter movies where the story of the Deathly Hallows is told. It's a CG scene, but it has this very organic kind of flowing visual style. And we were curious to see if we could sort of match some of those qualities through live action animation. I think even at one point we were considering shooting it underwater to get some of that effect, which would have been really interesting. But I was really inspired by how open he was and how creative and the ideas he was coming up with. So I was really excited to be involved in the project from that point on. So some months later I head to this enormous studio complex outside London, and already they have a lot of the sets built, so these things actually exist. The series really capitalised on practical effects, and puppetry being the key example. But the set design and all of these things, existed, and they look pretty much as good as they do in the series, which I think is kind of a rare thing. I then had the pleasure of working predominantly with the Froud family, Brian, Wendy and Toby Froud. So Brian Froud in particular I've been a huge fan of since I was very young. I used to get these goblin calendars which contained his sketches, and I later found out these were actually, a lot of them were concept art for the original Dark Crystal film. Toby Froud though is a very talented artist in his own right, and check this out here. So this is something he sculpted for my puppet. So I actually cast this in a more lightweight material, and you can see it in this video here that I produced, just giving them a sense of the range of motion of the puppet so we could figure out how to clothe it and how to kind of fit it into the Dark Crystal universe without getting in the way of any mechanisms. Wendy Froud actually had a huge hand in creating the costume for the Gelfling puppet. So a few more weeks of prep go by and we're basically ready to shoot. At this point I'm somewhat nervous as someone who works predominantly on their own, how I'm going to handle someone else on the camera, someone else on lighting. But it was an absolute breeze. The lighting was done so perfectly, the cinematography was lovely. The element of teamwork meant that all I had to do was focus on the puppetry, making sure the movement was good, and making sure I didn't accidentally dip my head in shot, which I might have done a couple of times at the beginning. The Henson Company also hooked me up with a flipped monitor, so that's a screen that's mirrored so that I can view my performance. They're notorious for using unflipped monitors, which I can't quite get my head around. I think we shot the whole thing in about 2 days, and I even had enough time to sort of wander around the set and see what the other puppeteers were up to, and this really blew me away. As someone that comes from a stop motion background, I hadn't really considered what a physically demanding job traditional Muppet style puppetry is. So to explain it a little bit better, I hopped on a call with fellow Dark Crystal puppeteer Dave Chapman to give you a better...
No, you idiot, we're not doing that quite yet. We've got to do a little advertising break for Trade Coffee. So the real question is, how do you make these advertising breaks watchable? You could make them funny, you could make them interesting, but whatever you do, it's always good to add a little bit of soul.
Baby, I've been thinking about you. Honey, I just can't stand to be without you. The knock on my door tells me you're here, and as soon as I can get you near, I'm gonna spin you round, tear it down, grind your beans until they're ground, yeah. Now I'm gonna be straight with you, I like my coffee
As black as it comes. But anyway, you like it. Trade can hook you up with over 50 of the nation's best roasters, featuring over 400 unique blends. Also, Trade is giving the first 100 people who click this here link 30% off their first coffee. There's a clickable link in the video description too. And when my brand manager contacted me asking if I preferred beans or ground coffee, I was like, you know what? Send both! Yeah!
So click the link in the description, make it your morning tradition. Hit up Trade with your subscription, they'll help you find your true prescription.
Okay, that's about it. Enjoy the interview, guys.
So I wanted to kind of give a little bit of background to people that saw the series but might not have necessarily known what was involved in terms of like the work. How was it to operate such physically different characters, and what specific challenges did each present?
They're all very, very different. Puddling's really easy. They're very light. They're very flexible. Very straightforward. Gelflings, another matter. They are really heavy, and there's a lot of animatronics in their heads, and so therefore it's a bit like a bowling ball that you're trying to keep steady and still and focused and centered. And they have quite complex face sort of stuff, which is where you have a controller on the left arm rod that controls brows and eyes left and right and blinks. And then Skeksis are like being imprisoned in a tent. They get very warm inside there. They're also very heavy. You wear them like a rucksack. It takes about 3 people to get you into a Skeksis. And then the heads are way up above. So, like I'm just under 6 foot, but when I'm a Skeksis, I'm about 7.5 foot because my arm is up in the air and that has the head, which is I'm running lip sync from, and I'm looking at a monitor inside the Skeksis. Right. Everything in the Dark Crystal, every single frame is a complicated feast.
And you had, did you have like physiotherapy you mentioned at some point afterwards?
Yeah, we had a physio on set all the time, Jocelyn, and she would see everybody in their breaks, and that's just fixing all the musculoskeletal thing. You get into all these crazy, these crazy shapes, and the body can only take so much of that. It's a really essential part of the team, different to your stuff. Do you need somebody to look after your hand?
Not really. I feel like a fraud kind of, because like I can keep the puppets on for like all day long and not really worry about it. I can take the 2-handed ones apart and kind of stretch out a little bit, and it's not an uncomfortable position to be in either. Do you know if Louis has ever directed a puppetry film before, and do you think his maybe not understanding the limitations was a benefit at points in terms of pushing boundaries?
That's a good question. He had not directed puppet characters before in any way, shape or form. He was learning as he went. He did lots of research, so he chatted to a lot of people. Obviously, he was in the Jim Henson Company, no better place to know how things work. But you never really, until you go and shoot, you never really know what the challenges are. Yeah. So I think you're right in the assumption that not knowing how difficult it is quite a blessing. I mean, I would like to ask him if he'd known how insanely hard it is, whether he would have still been as keen to do the project. Yeah. He said, I'm shooting a movie like I shoot a movie. It just happens that you're all inanimate objects that you guys are performing, which is which gave it an original look. And it does stand up as something where you watch and go, oh, that looks different. That looks new. So that's great for us.
Oh, awesome. No, that's great. I think we got everything there. Thanks so much.
Okay, so big thanks to Dave for taking the time out of his schedule to chat with me. Dave is a very busy guy because he's very good at what he does, and he's really lovely to work with as well. Also, a big thank you to Netflix because they're allowing me at the end of this video to show in its entirety the scene that I worked on. I also reached out to a very talented filmmaker called Randall Lobb, who made the behind the scenes of The Dark Crystal, and he had a little bit of B-roll of me working in the studio that I think you guys will be interested to see, so I'm going to put that up in the next couple of days. But for now, sit back, relax, and enjoy the clip from The Dark Crystal. I think you'll recognise my role in it. All the best. Thanks.
Once we were one, a single luminous form. One body, one will, one mind. We were perfect unity. We called ourselves Urskex.
2,000 trine ago, 18 of us left our world and came to Thra.
From another world.
We newly arrived Urskex filled Mother Aughra's head with stories of our adventures amongst the stars. She longed to explore the universe herself. So we gifted Mother Aughra with her orrery in exchange for the Crystal of Truth. But there can be no light
without dark.
We deceived Aughra and harnessed the power of the crystal for ourselves. Then, in our arrogance, our experiments on the crystal broke us into two.
The Skeksis and Mystics.
In the shock of division, a skirmish arose, and the wrathful Skeksis broke a shard from the crystal, creating the Darkening. Where's the shard? We were left as two halves trapped within separate bodies. All we want now is to return to our true form.
Where two is one. The other mystics went into hiding and await the day when their destiny will reveal itself at last.
We tried to convince our fellow Skeksis that we must be made whole. That is when they turned on us, branded me heretic, and forced us into hiding.
We want to be rejoined now. Every moment one or two is too terrible for one to bear.
But there is hope, for we have glimpsed into the future and seen our fate lies in the hands of the Gelfling.
For the Gelfling are closest to Thra.
The Skeksis will stop at nothing to preserve their dominion over Thra. And so, we forged our knowledge into a blade.
The dual glaive.
Cast in the deepest fires of the inner sun, it carries the spirit of Thra, and, when wielded by Gelfling, holds the power to unite the 7 clans and defeat the Skeksis. This is the sigil of great power. The Oriel.
I know that symbol.
I saw it in a vision.
7 clans,
7 fires.
joined as one in the cause of unity.